Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of BiblioTech on Air. I'm Israel.
I'm Lewis.
I'm Ruby.
And today, in honor of and celebration of Black History Month and Valentine's Day, because this episode is coming out on Valentine's Day, we're discussing Pride by Ibi Zoboi, which is a contemporary young adult novel that reimagines Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice through the lens of gentrification, Black and Afro-Latinx identity, and cultural pride. So before we get into the bio, I wanted to highlight some more resources related to Pride and Prejudice, such as the original novel by Jane Austen on Hoopla and cloudLibrary. We also have Pride and Prejudice and Zombies by Seth Grahame-Smith. We also have the 1995 BBC series on Canopy, and a Pride and Prejudice comic through Marvel Comics by Nancy Butler. So are any of y'all familiar with Pride and Prejudice and in any of its different variations?
Not before we discussed doing this episode.
Yeah, no, for some reason that had always been a blind spot for me, even though my partner loves Pride and Prejudice and has been wanting to show it to me for a while. So honestly, this is my first exposure to any sort of Pride and Prejudice story whatsoever.
Nice. I feel like this book is a very good introductory type of composition for Pride and Prejudice, because the novel itself it can a little bit lengthy. I think the audiobook is 11 hours compared to the audiobook for Pride is 6 hours. I zoomed by it.
Yeah.
It was, literally, I got finished it in a day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't remember her name, but whoever was reading it out also just had a very engaging, energetic way of reading it also. It never got boring.
Yeah. So let's get into that bio. So set in Bushwick, Brooklyn, Pride follows Zuri Benitez, a 17-year-old Afro-Latina girl who takes immense pride in her Dominican Haitian heritage, her tight-knit family, and her rapidly changing neighborhood. However, when the wealthy Darcy family moves into the newly renovated house across the street, Zuri immediately crashes with the arrogant and reserved Darius Darcy. As her older sister Janae falls for Darcy's charming brother, Ainsley, Zuri finds herself constantly at odds with Darius. Yet, despite their initial friction, she begins to question her assumptions about him. Meanwhile, she faces personal challenges, including preparing for college and dealing with the shifting dynamics of her neighborhood due to gentrification. So let's just get right into those questions. Okay, so Pride, it's a modern retelling of Pride and Prejudice. How do you think Ibi Zoboi successfully updates the classic for a contemporary audience?
It was done very well. I read this book before watching the movie. So watching the movie, I was like, oh man, it's nice how similar it is. It has its little differences, but for the most part, I liked how it was just like right on point with the characters and the story and everything.
I feel like this novel did an amazing job of reimagining it and making it very relatable, because there were some aspects in the book, namely gentrification, which is pretty prominent in the neighborhood that I grew up in now. Seeing Pride and Prejudice through that lens, and I feel like Zuri, who was Elizabeth Bennet, I feel like she was her strength really showed.
Yeah, she seemed a lot more vocal and a lot more stronger in this novel than in like the 2005 movie.
Yeah. And that makes sense considering the original, even though it was like, from my knowledge, since the original was written in like the early 1800s, it had a still different take on the like empowering women, but it was still revolutionary for its time. But especially now that this one was written like so like in a modern setting and by a modern author, I feel like it was just, I feel like of course things were going to be a little bit more like empowered towards the main character. And again, as someone who doesn't have like a lot of familiarity with the story of Pride and Prejudice, one of the very few things that I know about it is that a lot of people really love like the kind of like push and pull, like will they, won't they, like love hate between Mr. Darcy and Lizzie. And I feel like knowing that kind of baseline going into this, I was like, I really hope that it like hits that same like high point of like how well those two like interact with one another and how like you can believe that they would get back together after like having like an argument. And I feel like their dynamic was just really, really interesting,
Yeah, I definitely feel that in relation to Zuri and Darius's relationship compared to the original Pride and Prejudice, I felt like Darius, compared to Mr. Darcy in the original, he was a lot more vocal with his feelings about Zuri.
Mr. Darcy in the 2005 movie was just like
stoic.
He was,
there.
So stoic. And Zuri does see that about Darius. And it comes out later in the novel, be like, dude, why did you judge me? You didn't know me. You made these assumptions about me. Darius is saying, and she's like, yeah, so did you for me.
Yeah.
But he was pretty vocal, and it was pretty fast too. I was kind of thinking, I wonder what the timeline was for all these events.
Yeah.
It does go by pretty fast.
It felt like a matter of a couple weeks, but also when Madrina like comes down with like whatever, either like old age, illness, whatever it is, I feel like it's not like said like, oh, like this all happened really suddenly. So I feel like it's like over the course of the summer, a little bit more so than like it feels like it, because it feels like it happens in like the span of a couple weeks.
Yeah.
But I feel like that can't be right.
Yeah. Did it take place? It took place in the summer, correct?
Yes.
Because Janae came back from
Yeah.
school. How did you like? So do you remember Colin, Mr. Collins? So they chose like their adopted cousin. Was it their? Because it was Madrina's son, and I believe it was the adopted cousin, because then it wouldn't make much sense for him to
He wasn't
So-
really.
profess his love for.
He wasn't really related.
So
yeah,
Colin,
not by like blood.
so no, Colin was Madrina's nephew, and she basically adopted him as a son. I don't think there was any sort of relation
Yeah.
between them whatsoever.
but in the
like-
Jane Austen one,
They
they're
are cousins?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you feel that they
Makes sense.
portrayed Warren, Ruby, knowing?
It was nice because it was Warren was supposed to be Mr. George Wickham.
Yeah, Wickham.
I like how in the end when Warren and I need to go back with these characters so I don't get it mixed up. Warren and Darius Darcy, they get into it like a physical altercation, which obviously doesn't happen in the 1800 version. So it was nice to see. I was reading some reviews too, and a lot of people were talking about that they liked that they actually
That there was
got
that
to
clash.
that there was that like physical clash.
That it's like kind of cathartic, because if you're coming from the original and you're like, man, he should just deck him in the face.
Exactly,
and
he does in this novel.
You know, and it's pretty. I like how they. So Mr. Wickham, Warren, or Mr. Wickham in the original, he like gets Mr. Darcy's sister to fall in love with him, and it's because he's lost all his money, because I mean he was like a brother to Mr. Darcy and the family, all that type of stuff. He left. He was like, give me my inheritance, I'm gonna leave, bye. And so in an attempt to get more money, he gets Mr. Darcy's sister to fall in love with him. But in Pride, essentially he took like inappropriate pictures of his sister, which I feel like is even more invasive and more like ugly, but it's also very real.
It's
for
very
a modern retelling.
modern.
Yeah.
Especially because he tries to do it again, like later,
Yes.
or like he at least is like
With,
kind
like,
of being
Layla.
being really skeevy with Zuri's sister.
Yeah. Which is completely insane. But moving into the next question. So as I stated in the bio, it tackles themes of gentrification and tackles it pretty like outright. So the novel explores gentrification in Bushwick. How does Zuri's perspective on her changing neighborhood reflect real life discussions about gentrification in communities of color?
It was very well done. I liked how Zuri is voicing how she's noticing the change. She's like, the music's kind of fading away. The people are not like out in the streets as much as they were in the past. And that's a very real thing that happens. And the fact that in the end, the apartment building gets sold too. I was like, that was so upsetting, but it's just such a real thing that happens.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have anything to say about? I feel you had mentioned you watched a video.
So I, prior to recording, had watched a bit of the mini documentary by Complex News called No Free Walls, Street Art and Gentrification Collide in Bushwick, because I did not know anything about the specific situation of gentrification in like actual real life Bushwick. And it sort of, I feel like it parallels a lot of what happens in the story, because there is a sort of like nonprofit organization in Bushwick called the Bushwick Collective. It was founded by this guy who had grown up in Bushwick, and his father had been murdered, his mother had passed away, and the whole community came together to celebrate their life, much like happens with Madrina later in the novel Pride. They kind of celebrated her life, and they like painted a wall in dedication of his mother, and he kind of felt that sense of like my community's coming together, my community is giving me a family, like even though I just lost my blood related family. And he started the Bushwick Collective because he got super into art. And because he had made this nonprofit, and all of the walls in Bushwick are just like completely like chock full of all of this beautiful, beautiful art by the community, a bunch of people started noticing that, especially advertising agencies and stuff like that, like sort of capitalism at work, and started being like, hey, more people are coming to Bushwick, and, you know, more people are looking to like settle down here. And, well, we could kind of like get a piece of the pie, right? And I feel like that mirrors a lot of what happens in Pride, where it's like you see how rich and connected the community is, but there's so much around the corner of just like, yeah, but all of the bodegas are going away and they're being replaced with cafes, and like people are coming here kind of more for tourism than they are to enjoy the people that live here, you know?
Yeah, I think it does a great job of exploring gentrification, but focusing on Zuri. So as we stated, very strong, right? She's a strong-willed and passionate character. So how does she grow throughout the story, and what are some of her biggest challenges, you think?
I feel like she goes from being very walled off in terms of because she's a very focused individual. She's very focused on her future, what she wants, and she doesn't like necessarily give that up, which I feel like so many books will do that, where it's like, well, she was focused on a career, but now she's in love. Like, no, she stays focused, and she stays like wanting to make progress in her community and in her life. But like it's more that her emotional walls get torn down a bit, like things that she had previously wanted to like she wanted to keep the walls up and like kind of like shut herself out to love, keep this assumption that she had about Darius. And she just kind of starts to realize that like, hey, he's not so bad. I can still have my future and still like pursue a loving relationship, things like that.
Yeah. I like that. I like that you brought that up. Like what the reason why she wanted to go to Howard University. And when she was there, she was thinking like, man, all these past people behind me, I wonder what they did. Like if they went back to the community and took what they learned from this university to change their community in that way. I really liked the scene where she goes and visits the school too. Because when she does the poetry, the open poetry mic as well, when she stated that she was very nervous, but she was like, no one knows me here. I'm just going to go out there and I want to get my poetry out there. I really liked that they threw that in this version.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, she had these big assumptions, not just about like Darius, but also Ainsley, his parents, about anybody new, right? Which is a defense mechanism. And I'm very happy that she's only 17 years old.
Yeah.
And she has this opportunity to grow, and this kind of opportunity to also fall in love and to not give up, you know, what she wants to do. She even states to Mr. Darcy's or Darius's aunt, because Darius's aunt is like, why don't you go to Harvard? Or why don't you go here? And she's like, she explains exactly what you said, Ruby. She's like, no, I want to go to Howard because, you know, it has a history of Black Americans going to this school. And I also want to go back to my neighborhood. And I think that having those types of those morals, those stands, while going through this opportunity to grow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. But into the next question. It also discusses expectations placed on young women, particularly in communities of color. So how does Zuri push back against these expectations? And what does her journey say about independence and ambition? We've kind of already tackled this already a little bit, right? But if we could say more, what could be said?
I liked how she was more vocal in the interaction with Darius's grandma. How like the grandma was kind of putting her down and like, oh, why'd you bring this girl? Like, where's she from? What's her background, and just being really judgy. And Zuri's just kind of vocaling like, no, well, you know, this is where I'm from, but this is like what I believe in and everything like that. So like we were saying, like she seemed a lot more vocal in this interaction than like in the Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice, where she kind of just took it when the aunt was telling her things.
Yeah. And I feel like she finds a lot of power in being from her, like her specific community as well. Because like, I feel like a lot of people like look at her and they expect her to be like some amount of ashamed that she's from Bushwick. a lot of people will look at her and expect that she wants to get out and stay out because she's like finally getting away from Bushwick. But no, she is very much like, she's not only vocal about how much she loves Bushwick and about being herself and being a product of the culture she was raised in, but also she wants to go back, you know, and she wants to give back to a community that gave so much to her, you know. And I think that a lot of people would expect her to want to conform a bit more. And I think that she has just kind of an immense power of like, no, this is where I'm from, and this is always going to be where I grew up, you know?
Yeah. Kind of shifting over to the opposite end of the coin, Darius, right? So he starts off as quiet and reserved, but what moments in the book do you think show his true personality, and how does he change by the end?
I mean, I feel like him telling Zuri about the terrible things that Warren has done, but very specifically being like, do not tell anyone that this happened to my sister. And of course, Zuri also being like, no, I won't tell another soul. But like him not only being like, you can tell that it's not he wants to get back at Warren. You can tell that it's
He's looking out for her.
I'm looking out for Zuri. I'm making sure that she knows. And I am also looking out for my sister and making sure that her reputation is not tainted by the fact that this terrible thing happened to her.
One thing about that interaction, because Zuri is outside with Warren while he's like trying to go out with her or whatever. Darius is across the street just watching.
Yeah.
He's like texting her. So I'm just imagining this scenario play out. Zuri and Warren are right there. Darius is over there like,
Yeah.
And one thing I like about that as well is that when Darius tells her, I didn't want that to happen to you as well, Zuri's like, you think I would let that happen to me?
Yeah.
Boy,
Yeah.
come on. That is not going to happen. I would not let that happen to me. One moment where we do see his true personality is where he literally, like, and this happens in the original Pride and Prejudice as well, where he tells his brother Ainsley, be like, dude, you should, I don't trust Janae. I don't think you should be with her, man. Right? And he was just completely misinformed.
Yeah.
Right? And so he's looking out for his brother, but as smart and intelligent and self-aware as he thinks he is, he just got it completely wrong.
Yeah.
He just got it completely wrong. Looking out for your brother, that's a great thing. But man, I don't know what you were thinking.
Yeah.
Wasn't the excuse he used too was like, oh, he falls hard or something like that. Like I was just protecting him or something like that. But it's like you hurt her so bad too.
Yeah. I mean, it's what Zuri was doing with Janae as well. Because she was like, well, my sister, she falls like super hard in love. And the entire time she was like, stay away from him. He's not good for you. The only difference is that she was not successful in steering Janae away because Janae was like, you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, she's just as strong and strong-minded like her sister.
Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of how he changes by the end, Darius, just like Zuri, he's confronted with his prejudices, his assumptions. And again, like Zuri, I feel like this is the perfect time for this to be happening. You know, he has his whole life ahead of him. He's fallen in love. He's confronted all these assumptions that he's had. It's only upwards. It's only up for him. It's only up there for him, you know?
For that to happen to them in high school, like late high school, but like for that to happen to them in high school is very important because like I know people who are like well past college who don't who don't like tackle any of their biases.
Yeah, definitely.
Or people who have never had any reason to tackle their biases prior to college, just being dropped into a very diverse environment like a college and just being like, I don't know what to do, so I have to be defensive about like what I already believe because this is freaking me out. So like it's good. It's good to have those sort of things challenged like earlier on.
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely. Yeah. So Zuri, as you mentioned, she goes to that open poet mic night. And she loves writing poetry. And it's also poetry is also laden throughout the novel as well.
Yeah.
Right. So before a new chapter, it'll be introduced with a poem, which I think was beautifully done. It related so much to the chapter, and then it brought everything together as well. So Zuri loves writing poetry, but if she had a social media account, what kind of content do you think she'd be posting? Would it be like romantic poetry, gentrification rants, subtweets about Darius?
She'd be an influencer for sure.
Right, for sure.
She'd be getting bank from TikTok.
TikTok probably. In terms of like, honestly, in terms of like the fact that like she's 17 years old and like she's just like I feel like a lot of like the social media accounts of like whenever I was that age of like my friends was just basically us like insulated like talking to each other. So I feel like the subtweets about like Darius might be because it's just like, oh yeah, he doesn't follow my Twitter account or X, sorry, like he doesn't follow my account. So and I know all of my friends do. So if I like just want to throw something out there about like, oh yeah, somebody,
she'd be very subliminal in what she's posting, very deep. I can see me retweeting her.
Yeah, I feel like especially near the beginning, I don't know if she'd be posting her poetry. Not that she's like ashamed of her poetry, but I don't know if she's like vulnerable enough, especially since like when she goes out to the poetry night, she's like, okay, nobody here knows me, so I feel comfortable doing this, you know. Like, I feel like maybe like silly pictures with her sisters, stuff like that too.
Dude, and the fact that Darcy was there with like his friends too, I was like like I was horrified by that scene. I was like, oh, I would die.
Yeah, you never want your mortal enemy to meet you at poetry night.
Oh God,
for
no.
real. Like that's the most horrible place. In terms of romantic poetry, I don't know if she'd be doing romantic poetry. Maybe like since she's falling in love with Darius, like once they're together and the relationship is steady or whatever,
she might throw him a bone.
Yeah, she might throw him a bone.
I honestly, I feel like she would post, if any of her poetry she would post, it would be the one for Madrina. Just because that is something where she's like, this is someone who meant a lot to me. It's kind of like an in memoriam sort of thing. And that poem itself was so beautiful.
Yeah. I liked that they, on the topic of her Madrina and things like that, that part where they bring out the Madrina in the stretcher.
Oh yeah.
I was like, who died? Because this isn't in the original novel.
Yeah.
So, no one dies. It's when the stretcher was coming out, I was like, who? Like, no way one of her little sisters died.
For a second, I don't know why, for the longest time, I would get Pride and Prejudice confused with Little Women sometimes. And so, like, that moment with the die, I was like, oh, did her sister die? Like, is this what's happened? Did Beth die?
Wait, really? Because I feel like it built up pretty well that Madrina was going to die because she was so sickly in that one scene where Zuri went out to go get her the soup. She was so sickly and not vibrant. It was the first time she'd ever seen her without her makeup. Yeah. And I was like, oh no, she's gonna die. I was like so sad because I love Madrina. She's like such a vibrant, fun character, and it's also just another like window into something that culturally I was not privy to, but like that sort of religion. But it's really, really cool, and I was devastated when she died.
Yeah, I did like how at the funeral they stated the contrast between those who were more traditionally like, I don't know what religion it was.
That wears I think Catholic. That wears white
black, and then the people. Yeah, it was black for the religious
for Catholics.
The Catholics, and then for like the other individuals, it was wearing white. But yeah, I feel like in terms of social media, she'd be tackling all platforms. I think she'd be really really popular as well, and she would only grow like with her follower count. I wonder how if she would be stressing about the TikTok ban. I just wonder. But in terms of our last question. If you had to choose another classic novel to get a modern culturally diverse retelling like Pride, which book would you choose and why?
So, when I saw this question yesterday, I was very excited because any chance to shout out my favorite classic novel, Count of Monte Cristo. I adore that novel so much.
So long.
It is. See, that's my thing with this though. I adore that novel, but I cannot recommend it in good faith to a lot of people because it is very long.
Yeah.
And there is just so much like, here is the name of this specific region of France in the 1800s, and it's important to know that this is where this part of the story is taking place, and you're gonna have to remember that 200 pages from now. Like, it is very dense, but underneath that density is like such an incredible story about like revenge and like with whether or not like going too far, like you're going too far with the concept of revenge. Excellent book. I love it very much. And I was thinking like, oh, like I guess you could do like a corporate modern retelling of like, oh yeah, he's getting revenge on these people who are like tanked his business. But I thought about it some more. This would kill as like a high school drama because like the image in my head of just like the person getting like slighted in high school, maybe like getting expelled like freshman year by people he's been like going to school with for years, and then like him not, I don't know, maybe he like transitions or something. So like no one recognizes him anymore. So by the time he's in college, he sees all these people who like got him expelled living their lives. And then he's like, okay, let me ruin your future.
You got to trademark that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get that idea.
Write it in a letter, mail it off to your address. And there you go. But I would like to see, what is it called? War and Peace. Also another long novel.
Yeah.
But I would like to see a modern retelling. And I think I would like to see it kind of like in the vibe of Succession, the TV show. I feel like that would be very powerful. I haven't read War and Peace. I've seen the series with Paul Dano. Great, but I would love to see War and Peace, like
That's a good one.
something like that.
Yeah, because I would not read those original novels.
I kind of want to, but it's just so intimidating.
Yeah, dude.
It is so intimidating.
I don't know if I have the manpower for that.
What about you, Ruby? Any
I don't know.
modern retellings?
I could maybe see like Little Woman. Like I feel like anytime it's redone, it's like still in the in that era. So I could see it like being modern and
for sure.
hip.
Yeah.
But in terms of Pride, right? Ruby, seeing Pride and Prejudice, reading Pride, with that in mind, what would you give Pride out of 10?
Oh, a 10 out of 10.
Yeah?
It was really nice. I liked that this was like my introduction to Pride and Prejudice. Because like I said, I don't know if I would have read the actual Jane Austen one. But since this one was so fun to read and it gave me a really good grasp on what's going on, now I think I'll be able to tackle the actual Jane Austen and Pride and Prejudice.
Nice. Louis?
I'm honestly going to go 9 out of 10. And I'm going to admit that last point is more just because I haven't gotten the full experience of what the story was going for yet because I don't know much about the original source material. I'm pretty sure by the time that I have, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, that's a really good, solid adaptation, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I would give it a 9 out of 10. Not a 10 just because of the pacing. It was very fast. I would have liked a lot more.
Yeah.
But with that being said, within that 6-hour span of the audiobook, I think Ibi Zoboi, she did an amazing job of really helping us understand these characters and where they're coming from and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So 9 out of 10 for me.
Nice.
But with that being said, everybody listening or watching, if you're interested in Pride by Ibi Zoboi, you can check it out on cloudLibrary and Hoopla, ebook and audiobook, I believe, and also the plethora of other resources that we have about Pride and Prejudice. We have that Marvel comic, we have we have that
The
BBC
zombies.
series. Yeah, we have. I believe we also have the soundtrack as well of the Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, yeah,
and
we
Zombies.
do.
Although that I'm not gonna lie, that I was so excited about that movie because I love Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but that movie was not good. That was not good.
That'll be another episode.
But we hope you enjoyed this episode on Pride by Ibi Zoboi. Check it out for yourself. If you have a library card, great, check it out. If you don't have a library card and you're a Bexar County resident, visit one of our 4 branches, register in person, or visit our website, bibliotech.org. It's going to be that first tab, register. You'll get your library card, a password you create, and then you have access to all of our resources, Hoopla, cloudLibrary, Canopy. But yeah, with that being said, I'm Israel.
I'm Lewis.
I'm Ruby. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, and we'll catch you on the next one.